Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear? Okay, good. Let's see if I can. In 1977, a young Dr. William Trogdon was a professor. I don't know if we're getting feedback from that or what. A young professor at Stevens College. During the winter of 1977, he got word that Stevens College population was diminishing and that his position was no longer going to be existing the following semester, the spring semester in 1978. He found out on the same day that he had been estranged from his wife for about 9 months, found out on the same day that she had a friend. So there was an opportune time to hit the road for William Least Heat Moon, or William Trogdon at that time, to see what's out there, to see what the backroads of America look like, something that he had been dreaming of doing for years anyway. The time was right. So he left Columbia, Missouri, headed east, made a clockwise circle around the United States through 38 states and almost 14,000 miles of backroads America. It's history now that the book, as a result of that, was Blue Highways. I first started reading that book on a cold January night in 1983. It didn't take me very long to decide someday I'm going to make that trip. At the time, my wife was a second-year medical student. I was just 3 years into my medical practice here in Columbia. I had an 8-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. I did not have the time to take off 3 months to travel his route. So it was a dream that I had to hang on to for about 3 decades. I didn't know at that time that the 5-year-old boy that I just put to sleep downstairs would be one of the photographers to help me fulfill that dream, my son, Edgar IV, the one that's 5 inches taller. When I retired from medicine in 2005, I went to work with Ayler Fine Art Photography, a company that we formed. And about a year into that, I said, I'm going to talk to Heat Moon about that trip. So we met at a cafe in downtown Columbia, Addison's, and I showed him a few of these images from the Oregon coast, which was part of his route. And I said, Heat Moon, my son, Edgar IV, and I would like to retrace your route and do a book, Blue Highways Revisited, a photographic version of your book, because we can't begin to write like you write, but we can take good photographs. His answer, I was very pleased, was very positive. He said, one of the most common questions people ask me is, when are you going to take the trip again to find out how things have changed? But I'm never going to make the trip again. Have at it. He would confide to me about 4 years later that he didn't think my son or I or anyone else for that matter would actually make that 14,000-mile journey and turn it into a book. So our goals in taking the trip were to find the characters from Heat Moon's book, Blue Highways. And we found about 11 of them still living almost 3 decades later. We wanted to find the beauty of backroads America that he had so beautifully described in his book. We wanted to find the 530 taverns that he frequented. We wanted to find the mom and pop cafes that he always ate at. And you'll remember one of my favorite parts is that in the City Cafe in Gainsborough, after visiting it, he came up with the 5-calendar system for ranking palatable food on backroads America. If the cafe had no calendar, it was the same as eating at an interstate pit stop. 1 calendar suggested that they had pre-processed food assembled in New Jersey. 2 calendars you'd eat at only if it had fish trophies present on the wall with the 2 calendars. 3 calendars meant that you couldn't miss the farm boy breakfast because it was going to be good. 4 calendars, try the homemade pie as well. 5 calendars, keep it under your hat or they'll franchise. So I'm going to briefly take you on an 18,899-mile trip around the United States, and then we'll get to the primary speaker. You would think making a trip almost 3 decades after the original author would be very difficult to recognize what he was talking about. What surprised me was that time and time again we'd go over a hill or go around a bend, and there was a scene that he had so beautifully described 30 years prior. I mean, you knew that was it. In this case, it was on Indiana 66 that followed the Ohio's muddy banks, and sometimes it was not 10 feet from the road. Well, I had to pull forward about another 50 yards to find a place to park because literally there was only a shoulder there and the bank of the Ohio River. He also visited some wonderful towns. Two of my favorites are Nameless, Tennessee, and Dime Box, Texas. When I arrived in Nameless, Tennessee, and you'll have to reread Blue Highways to find out how it got its name. When I arrived, I knocked on every door in town except for one. It had a very angry dog in a fenced-in front yard, and nobody was home. I was pleased to find that the J.T. Watts General Merchandise store was still there, but of course, I had no idea how to find the Wattses. Later, I would track down Davis Watts in a town probably 35 miles away, and he and his aunt, Marilyn, would come back and meet me out at Nameless, in Nameless. Aunt Marilyn unfortunately sat down on this end of the bench while I was talking to Davis, her son having helped her out of a pickup truck. And I asked her, hey, Marilyn, I'm really sorry, but you know, in the original photo, you were at the other end of the bench. Could we gradually scoot you down? And she gradually began to move that direction. And halfway down, she said, you know, everyone in that picture, but me, is dead. And I'm just about dead as well. So she, like most of the other characters that we were able to find, were indeed wonderful characters. I really thought I would most enjoy, and I thoroughly enjoyed the landscape photography because he described many beautiful scenes, but I thoroughly enjoyed the people. Getting to see the inside of that store was like taking a time capsule back about 30 years, and it is preserved in about 3 Saturdays in the fall. It's open as more of a museum. He continued east until he hit the North Carolina coast, then turned southwest, went through South Carolina, and of course we're making a fairly rapid progression here. And as he was passing through Conyers, Georgia, he saw this water tower, and he said, even in the Bible Belt, it was unusual to see a cross at the top of a water tower. So he drove down this magnolia-lined driveway to find the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. And it was there where he met one of my favorite characters in Blue Highways. And remember, there were 23 photographs of people, 37 people in all. And one of them was Patrick Duffy, a very outspoken monk. And Heat Moon carries on a long conversation with him that goes on 5 or 6 pages. He was in the monastery for about 20 years total. Then he became a priest in the San Jose Parish in New Mexico, where I was able to track him down. He was already retired. You knew how outspoken he was. One of the first questions I asked him was, what was it like being in Blue Highways? And in typical fashion for Father Patrick Duffy at that time, he said it was a pain in the ass. People kept coming to the monastery asking, what's it all about? By now we're heading across southern Louisiana on Highway 14. Heat Moon loved eating Cajun food, and it was along that path that he decided or wished that the British had exiled more Acadians to America, if only for their cooking. We're now in Texas. The trip across Texas was 1,000 miles long. About a third of the way across, we came to the little town of Dime Box. Claude Tyler was a barber who took Heat Moon out of his chair and took him over to this window right here to look at a cottonwood tree that was growing out from underneath his building. It was lifting up his foundation, and for 6 years he had cut that darn thing out and it kept coming back. Unfortunately, before Heat Moon's book was actually released in 1983, Claude Tyler died. But when I went back almost 30 years later, that cottonwood was still causing havoc in that building. We're now into New Mexico. It's difficult to see with these lights on, but there is a fence along on either side. And Heat Moon pointed out that a hand-cranked coffee mill helped kill off the Old West. Well, a guy by the name of Glidden, Illinois, developed a way of using a hand-cranked coffee mill to make barbed wire. So Heat Moon's conclusion was that coffee mill converted most of the cowboys to feedlot attendants. Another of my favorite towns was Frenchman, Nevada, and people often ask me what did change on the route. The 2 things that changed the most were Frenchman, Nevada, and an area in West Virginia. When Heat Moon went through, Frenchman had a population of 4 people. Lori Cheelander, the younger lady here, and her mother-in-law, and her husband Chris, and her daughter Callie. And it consisted of 2 buildings. The larger building was a cafe, bar, home, motel. The other one was just a garage related to the service station. Behind that was a fence that separated their property from the naval bombing range. And Heat Moon heard in that cafe, bar, a story about a bomb that got dropped and rolled up on the road and almost killed a guy. And so when I went back there,